The bridge at Collie Ford was gone, Mrs. Trevik said, and half the Northburn road with it. Maria set the flat iron back on its trivet. She had not heard the old woman come in. Gone how? Gone as in water, miss. The beck came up in the night and took the middle span clean off its piers. Mrs. Trevik wrung her apron. Her hands were red from the cold. Sam Alder rode down to look. There's a carriage in the ditch by the ford. Overset. A gentleman inside it, they say, and hurt. Outside, the rain came at the windows in long grey sheets. It had rained for 2 days without stopping. The lane had become a river, the garden a marsh, and the sky sat so low upon the hills that the hills themselves had vanished. Hurt where? They didn't say. Sam's gone on for the surgeon at Marden, but Marden's 11 miles, and the road under water past the mill. The old woman looked at her, and Maria understood the look. She had seen it many times when her father was alive. It was the look people gave the doctor's house when they did not know where else to turn. Maria was already reaching for her cloak. "Miss Oakshaw?" Mrs. Trevik's voice went thin. "You can't go down to the ford in this. A young woman alone. My father went out in worse than this 100 times. She pinned the cloak at her throat. Her fingers did not shake, though the cold had got into the room. "Bring the lantern and the small bag, the leather one, and put water on." She did not wait to be argued with. She had learned, at 22, that there was very little use in waiting. Her father had been dead 9 months. The house he left her was small and honest and much too quiet. 3 rooms below, 2 above, a garden gone to seed. His name still stood on the plate by the door. She had not yet had the heart to take it down. Dr. Oakshaw had been the only physician within a day's ride, and the people of the Dale had loved him in the plain, undemonstrative way of people who cannot spare much. When he died, they had brought her eggs and firewood and a great deal of silence. Then they had gone back to their lives, as people do, and forgotten there was a girl in the doctor's house, with his books and his instruments, and none of his standing. She went down the lane with the lantern held low. The rain found the back of her neck at once. Twice her boots went in past the ankle. Once the mud tried to keep them. But she got to the ford, and there it was, a travelling chaise on its side in the swollen ditch. One wheel still turned slowly in the wind. The near horse was gone. The far horse stood with its head down in the wet. A man knelt in the mud by the wreck. Not the gentleman. A servant by his coat, broad, grizzled, holding his own arm against his chest. He looked up when her light fell on him. "Thank God," he said. "Are you the surgeon?" His daughter? She was already past him, down to the carriage door, which lay uppermost now like a hatch. How many were there? Just the 2 of us, him and me. The servant's face was grey. He's inside. He was talking a minute ago. He stopped. Maria wrenched the door. It came half open. Inside, folded against what had been the far side, was a man in dark travelling clothes, one hand pressed to his head, the other braced against the seat. Blood ran from somewhere in his hair and made a black line down his temple in the lantern light. He was not unconscious. His eyes were open, and when the light came in, they fixed on her with a kind of hard, held-in patience that she would remember for a long time afterward. "Don't move," she said. "Let me look at you before you try. I'm not hurt badly." His voice was low, roughened, and very steady for a man upside down in a ditch. "My man is. His arm. See to him. Your man can wait 5 minutes. He's sitting up and swearing, which is a good sign. She got a knee onto the door frame and leaned in. Follow my finger with your eyes. Don't turn your head. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. He followed her finger. His eyes were a pale grey-green, the colour of the underside of a willow leaf, and they did not waver. The cut above his brow was long, but not deep. His pupils were even. When she pressed the bones of his face, he did not flinch from pain, only from her nearness, which was a different thing. "You'll do," she said. "You've cut your head, and you'll ache tomorrow, as though a horse sat on you. Nothing worse. Can you climb out if I brace the door?" "Yes." He did not thank her. He looked at her instead, once, from her wet hair to her ruined boots, as though he were reading something in the arrangement of her. "You came out in this alone. There was no one else to come?" She backed out into the rain and put down her hand. "Now, if you please. The water's still rising." She got them both back up the lane, which was harder than getting down it. The servant, Harker, the gentleman called him, could walk, but his arm hung wrong at the shoulder, and he was heavy and proud, and did not like leaning on a girl. The gentleman walked mostly on his own, one hand on the wall of hedgerow, the other pressed now and then to his brow. He said almost nothing. Twice he looked back toward the ruined chaise, as if it grieved him, though a man does not grieve a carriage, and she thought perhaps there was something in it he did not wish to leave. Mrs. Trevec had the fire built high and the kettle screaming. She took one look at the 2 soaked strangers dripping on the flags, and did not say a single word about the impropriety of it, for which Maria could have kissed her. "The kitchen's warmest," Maria said. "Bring him to the light." She set the coachman's shoulder first, because a shoulder out of its socket is a cruelty that ought not to wait. She had watched her father do it perhaps 40 times, and had done it herself twice under his eye. She sat Harker in the hard chair, put her foot against the base of his ribs, took his wrist in both hands, and turned and pulled in the long, slow way that looks like nothing, and is in fact everything. The joint went back with a sound like a knuckle cracking. Harker made a noise between a shout and a sob, and then, astonishingly, laughed. "By God," he said. "That's it. That's the very thing. I've had army surgeons make a worse job of it. Sit still. I'll bind it so you don't undo my work reaching for your dinner." She was aware the whole while of the gentleman watching from the settle by the fire. A cloth held to his head, his eyes on her hands. She was used to being looked at, as though she were part of the furniture. She was not used to this. This was a man watching the way a man watches a thing he means to understand. When she came to clean and close the cut over his brow, he held very still. She worked by candle and firelight, her face a hand's breadth from his, and she felt the exact moment his breathing changed. "This will sting," she said. "I'm sorry for it." "Then it's done. Do it." She drew the edges together and set 3 small stitches, quick and even, the way her father had taught her. Small bites. No hurry. Let the flesh do the healing, and only help it lie straight. The gentleman did not make a sound, but his hand, resting on his knee, closed slowly into a fist, and then, when she tied off the last stitch, opened again. "There." She sat back. "You'll have a scar. A small one. It won't spoil you. I wasn't aware I had anything to spoil. Everyone has something." She wiped her hands. "What's your name, sir?" For the surgeon, when he comes, and for my own house. I don't like nursing a man I can't call by anything." There was the smallest pause, a held second. She did not notice it then. She noticed it very much later. "Roland," he said. "Roland what?" "Just Roland will do." He watched her over the cloth. "And you are Miss Oakshire, the doctor's daughter who comes out in a flood." "I am." She stood and took up the basin. "You'll sleep in my father's old room. It's aired, at least. Harker can have the settle by the fire, where I can see that arm. And in the morning, Mr. Rowland, when there's light, we'll see what's to be done about you both. There'll be no doing anything tonight. The road is a river, and the bridge is in the sea by now." He was quiet a moment. The fire snapped. Rain ran down the black window. "You're very calm," he said, "for a woman with 2 strange men in her kitchen, and no one to send them off. I've buried both my parents and half this parish." Maria looked at him steadily. "There's not a great deal left in the world that frightens me, sir. Certainly not a man who lets a girl put stitches in him without so much as flinching. Good night." She took the candle and went up. Behind her, in the firelight, she left a duke she did not know she had. He sat in a doctor's kitchen with 3 stitches over his eye. He watched the door she had closed, as though it were the most interesting thing he had seen in years. He should have told her that first night. He knew it even as he did not. Roland Ashford, 9th Duke of Eastmere, master of Northburn and 11,000 acres, lay in a dead country doctor's narrow bed. He held 2 lesser titles he never used, and a seat in the Lords he attended only when the whips grew shrill. He listened to the rain. He did not sleep. He had left Northburn 4 days before with Harker and a plain hired chaise, and no crest on the door, as he did once or twice a year, when the weight of being looked at grew past bearing. It was the one indulgence he permitted himself, to go out into the world as a man of no particular consequence, to buy his own dinner and be spoken to plainly, and see how the road looked to the people who had to walk it. His steward thought he went to inspect the northern farms. His grandmother knew better, and said nothing, which was her genius. He had not planned the flood. He had not planned the girl. He turned on the hard mattress, and the cut above his eye pulled, and he thought of her hands. Small, chapped, sure. He thought of the way she had said, "Your man can wait 5 minutes," as though she had ordered dukes about all her life. He thought of, "There's not a great deal left in the world that frightens me," and how she had said it without heat, as a plain report of the weather in her own chest. She did not know who he was. That was the whole of it, and it was extraordinary. Every soul he had met in 10 years had known who he was before he opened his mouth. Mothers had arranged their daughters' faces before he crossed a room. Men had adjusted their opinions to match his. He had grown so accustomed to being a title with a man somewhere inside it that he had half forgotten there was a man at all. Here, in this house, he was only Roland, who had cut his head. He found he did not want to give that up. Not yet. Not for a day or 2. It was, he told himself, a small deception, and a harmless one. The road was gone. He could not leave in any case. Where was the injury in letting her go on, seeing him plainly a little longer, when the plain seeing was the first honest thing that had happened to him in years? He was a clever man, and he had reasoned his way into a great many things in his life. This was the first time he reasoned his way into something he would come to regret and did not know it. The road did not open in the morning. It did not open the morning after. The beck stayed high and brown and loud. The ford was impassable, and word came up from the village that the bridge would want a fortnight, and a mason, before anyone crossed it dry. Harker's arm needed rest. The gentleman's head needed watching. And so a thing settled over the doctor's small house that none of them had chosen. None of them, if they were honest, entirely wished it to end. It was a strange, suspended, rain-walled quiet, as though the flood had closed a door on the ordinary world. Maria kept them fed. It was not easy. The larder had been thin before two large men arrived in it, and she had little money and less to spare. But she was the daughter of a man who had been paid in eggs, in rabbits, once in a live goose. She knew how to make a great deal out of not much. She was too proud to let either of them see her count. She saw, all the same, that Mr. Rowland noticed. He noticed everything. That was the first thing she learned about him. He sat by the fire the first idle day, still and grey-eyed, and outwardly at his ease. By evening he had learned the whole running of her small poor house without asking a question. Which shutter did not close? Which hinge cried? That the chimney smoked when the wind came from the fell? That Mrs. Trevix's knees pained her on the stairs? That Maria took the smallest portion at every meal and called it her habit? The second idle day, he mended the shutter. She found him at it in the grey forenoon, coat off, sleeves turned, a borrowed hammer in his hand, and 3 of her father's old nails between his lips. He had taken the warped shutter off its hinge. Now he was planing the swollen edge with a spoke shave he had found in the outhouse. He did it well, with the unhurried competence of a man who liked to use his hands and rarely got the chance. "You needn't," she said from the door. "I know." He did not look up. "It's cried at me for 2 days. I've a low tolerance for a thing that could be mended and isn't. You're a guest. I'm a man eating your bread who cannot pay for it in coin." He fitted the shutter back, and it swung true and closed without complaint, and he looked at it with a quiet satisfaction that she found, to her surprise, unbearably human. "Let me pay for it in hinges. It's the only currency I've got about me." She let him. She told herself it was because a mended shutter was a mended shutter, and pride was a poor blanket on a cold night. In truth, it was because there was something in watching him work. The care of it. The way he tested the swing twice, and was not content until it was right. It reached into her and turned a key she had thought rusted shut. He mended the shutter. Then the gate. Then the loose flag on the kitchen floor that had tripped her father in his last months, and that she had never been able to lift alone. He mended things the way some men pray, steadily and without display. When Harker's arm was better, the 2 of them rehung the byre door. They cleared the choked gutter that had helped flood her garden. Her poor small house began, day by day, to sit a little straighter on its foundations. She should have wondered more than she did. A man of business, an agent, a steward. That was what she took him to be. A great house's man sent north on some errand. Such a man did not usually plane a shutter like a joiner. He did not sit and let a stitch of pain go into his own head without a word. But she was tired and grateful, and the rain shut out the world. It is a strange truth that we ask the fewest questions of the people we most wish to keep. Once, on the 5th day, she came out to the byre at dusk and stopped in the doorway unseen. Harker sat on an upturned pail, his mended arm in its sling. The gentleman stood at the bench beside him, mending a broken bridle by lamplight, the surviving carriage horse stirring in the stall behind them. The two men were not talking. They did not need to. There was an ease between master and servant that she had not looked for, a long, quiet habit of trust. And she understood, in that moment, that whatever else Mr. Rowland was, he was a man other men would follow. She did not know yet what to make of it. She only stood a while in the blue cold and watched him work, and felt the strange suspended peace of the flooded days settle deeper into her, like warmth into stiff hands. Then she went in and set another place. She said nothing. She was happier than she had been in a year, and did not let herself ask why. She thought about it that night, lying awake with the rain on the glass. She had spent 9 months believing the interesting part of her life was over, buried in the same churchyard as her father. Now a stranger sat below her stairs, mending the house board by board, and the hours had colour in them again, and she did not trust the feeling in the least. Gratitude was a safe thing to give a guest. What she felt was not entirely gratitude, and she knew it, and she told herself firmly that she was far too sensible a woman to lose her head over a man who would ride away the moment the water fell. She was right about the sense. She was wrong about the head. It was, she would think a long time afterward, already too late by the third evening, though neither of them would have owned it under torture. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. The evenings were the danger. The days had work in them, and work is a wall a person can hide behind. But when the light failed early, as it does in a wet northern autumn, the evenings had nothing in them. The candles were lit, the fire banked, Harker gone off to snore on the settle. There was nothing left to do but sit and talk, or not talk, which was worse, because the silences between them had begun to feel like rooms they were both standing in. He read to her, the third evening. She had a shelf of her father's books, mostly physic and sermons. Among them were a battered Cowper and a Robinson Crusoe with the spine gone. He took up the Cowper without asking. He read in his low, even voice while she darned by the fire. He read well. He did not perform it. He let the lines lie plain. Now and then he stopped, and they spoke of what he had read. She found he had thought about a great many things, and pretended to have thought about none of them. "You were not raised to be a steward," she said, on the fourth evening. It came out of her before she waited. His hands went still on the book. "No? You hold your knife like a lord. You read Cowper as though you've argued with him. And you look at my house." She chose the words. "As a man looks at a thing he could buy and has decided not to want. I don't know what you are, Mr. Rowland, but you are not a clerk." The fire settled. For a moment she thought she had gone too far. She thought he would rise and be cold, and put between them the little distance of rank she had felt him holding in reserve all along, like a coat kept over his arm. Instead, he set the book down. He looked at the fire, not at her. "I was raised," he said slowly, "to be worth exactly what I was born to, and not 1 penny more, to be counted before I was known, to walk into a room and watch every face in it rearrange itself around what I represented, to stand there until I could not have told you whether a single soul in England liked the man, or only the position." He stopped. "Forgive me. That was more than you asked." It wasn't. She had put her darning down. "It was the truest thing you've said since you came." He looked at her then. The scar over his brow had begun to knit, a small pale seam. "And you? You've told me you fear nothing. That can't be the whole of it." "It isn't," she surprised herself by answering. "I fear I'll grow old in this house, being useful to people who forget me the moment I've been useful. My father was loved. I was the doctor's clever girl who fetched the bandages. When he died, they were kind for a fortnight. And then I became a young woman living alone, which is a thing the world does not know what to do with, and so it looks away from it." She smoothed the darning on her knee. "I'm not pitiable, Mr. Rowland. I have a house, and my hands, and my father's name over the door. But I'm not seen. I have not been seen since I was a child, and I had begun to think I never would be, and that I ought to make my peace with it. That is my fear. Since you asked." The room was very quiet. The rain had thinned to a whisper against the glass. "I see you," he said. 3 words. He said them plainly, without weight, the way he said everything, and that was what made them terrible. She looked up and found his pale eyes steady on her. And she understood, with a lurch of something half joy and half dread, that he meant it exactly. She understood that a great deal of trouble was going to come of it. She did not sleep well that night either. By the 6th day, the water had begun, at last, to fall. The beck ran clearer. Sam Alder came up the mended lane with news. The ford might be crossed on horseback by the week's end, if a man were careful and did not mind wet boots. A cart from Marden had got as far as the mill. The world was coming back. Maria heard the news with a smile she did not feel, and saw the same false smile pass over the gentleman's face, like the shadow of a cloud. And neither of them said what both of them thought. It was that afternoon that the boy came. His name was Robin. He was 7, the cottager Alder's youngest, and he had a splinter in the heel of his hand the size of a thorn, and a great deal of dignity about not crying. His mother had sent him up to the doctor's house. For where else did you send a hurt child, doctor or no? Maria sat him on the kitchen table. She drew the splinter with a needle and a steady hand, while the boy stared at the ceiling and breathed like a small bellows. The gentleman came in from the byre in the middle of it. He stopped in the doorway, and Maria, glancing up, saw a thing cross his face that she did not understand then. A kind of stricken tenderness, quickly mastered. As a man looks at a scene through a window, he knows he cannot enter. "There," she told the boy. "Done. Braver than half my grown patients. Hold still while I bind it. Will it come out my hand, miss? The bad? It's out already. Look, that's the whole of the bad, there on the cloth, and now it's gone in the fire." She lifted him down. "Off home. Tell your mother to keep it clean and dry." The boy went to the door, then stopped and looked up at the tall stranger blocking the light. "Are you the Mrs. Husband?" The kitchen went still. "No," said Rowland. "Then who are you?" There was a pause. Maria did not fill it. She found she wanted very much to hear how he would answer a child who had no reason on earth to flatter him. "A man she pulled out of a ditch," he said at last, "and who has been trying to be worth the trouble ever since." The boy considered this with a child's grave fairness, decided it was satisfactory, and ran out into the wet. And in the quiet, after the door banged, Maria and the gentleman, looked at each other across the small, warm kitchen. Neither of them said a word. The not saying was louder than anything either of them might have spoken. He left 2 days later. There was no help for it. The ford could be crossed. A hired horse had come up from Marden with a note from an inn, where, it seemed, some servant of his had been waiting on his master for above a week, with growing alarm. He read the note by the window, with his back to the room. When he turned, his face had put its old distance on again. And Maria understood, with the calm of long practice, that the suspended thing was over. The world had opened its door. She helped Harker with his coat. She wrapped what bread and cold bacon she could spare in a cloth over the coachman's protest, because it was 11 miles to Marden, and men are foolish about food. And then she stood in her doorway, arms folded against the cold, while the gentleman settled his hat and looked at her. She made herself look pleasant and ordinary, not at all as though something were being carried out of the house that she had only just discovered was in it. Miss Oakshire, he seemed to be choosing among several things to say, and to find all of them wanting. I owe you more than I can pay in hinges. You owe me nothing. You cut your head, and I stitched it. It's my trade, or was. That isn't what I owe you for. He held her eyes. I've been a great many places, in a great many houses. This is the first in a long time that I've been sorry to leave. He paused. May I write to you? She had not expected that. Her heart did a foolish thing. A steward, she said carefully, does not write to a doctor's daughter, Mr. Rowland, not without meaning something by it. And whatever you are, and I've stopped pretending I believe you're what you say, you are something I am not. I've felt it since the first night. You needn't write. I shan't hold it against you. Maria. It was the first time he had used her name. He said it like a man setting something down that he had carried too long. Let me write. Against every clear-eyed instinct she owned, she said. Yes. He mounted the hired horse. Harker touched his hat to her, with real feeling. And she stood in the doorway of her father's house, and watched a man ride down the mended lane, out of the small, closed world of the flood. She told herself, sensibly, firmly, and quite uselessly, that she would very likely never see him again. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about a good many things, and she was about to learn all of them at once. The letter came 8 days later, and it was not from Mr. Rowland. It was carried by a groom in dark blue livery on a horse worth more than Maria's house, and it was sealed with a great deal of red wax and a crest she did not know. And Mrs. Trevik brought it in, holding it away from herself, as though it might go off. Maria broke the seal in the kitchen, with the winter light coming grey through the mended shutter. Miss Oakshire, it read, in an old woman's spidery, imperious hand. You will not know my name, and I shall spare you the whole of it for now. I am told by my grandson that some weeks ago you dragged him out of a ditch. You set 3 stitches in his head. You fed him for a se'nnight on next to nothing, and did not once ask him for a farthing or a favour. I am also told you do not know who he is. This last, I confess, has kept me in charity with the human race for a full fortnight, which at my age is no small gift. Come to Northbourne. I am sending the carriage Thursday. Bring your woman, if it eases you. There are things you had better hear from me than from the county, which will have them within the month, and will not be kind. Sibylla, Duchess of Eastmere. Maria read it twice. Then she sat down. "Miss," said Mrs. Trevec, "you've gone the colour of the cloth." "Northburn," Maria said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. "The great house on the far side of the fell. The one the Duke owns. The one nobody sees, because the Duke is never there and doesn't care who knows it." She set the letter flat on the table and pressed it with her hand as though it might rise up. "Mrs. Trevec, what was the colour of the livery on that groom outside?" "Dark blue, miss. Blue and silver. And the crest on the door of a wrecked carriage in a ditch that a man grieved to leave." She heard herself begin quietly, almost to laugh, and stopped it, because it was not that kind of laugh. "Roland, of course. Roland Ashford, Duke of Eastmere." She looked up at the old woman. "I have been feeding a duke on rabbit, and dripping and lecturing him about his knife, and he let me. For a fortnight. He let me." It was not the deception that struck her hardest in that first grey minute. It was the smaller, sharper thing beneath it. She had told him she was never seen. She had opened the one true door in herself, in her own kitchen, by her own fire, to a man she believed to be as plain and unregarded as she was. And he had stood on the other side of that door the whole time, being the most looked-at man in the north of England, and had let her think they were the same. "I see you," he had said. He had seen her, right enough. He had seen her not knowing, and he had said nothing. She almost did not go. She stood in her own small kitchen that night, the letter on the table, the fire low. She was as angry as she had ever been in her life. A cold, clear, quiet anger. Her father's anger, the kind that does not shout because it has no need. She thought of every plain word she had said to Mr. Roland. She thought of the shutter and the gate and the reading by the fire, and how she had let him in foot by foot, believing him a fellow traveller in the small country of the overlooked. And all the while he had been a great lord playing at being poor, the way rich men play at being poor, as a rest, a diversion, a thing to go home from. That was the thought that nearly kept her by her own hearth. A thing to go home from. He had a home to go to that could have swallowed her whole house into one of its cold rooms. She did not. But she was her father's daughter, and her father had never in his life turned his back on a summons because it frightened him. And there was the Duchess's letter. "You had better hear it from me than from the county." That meant there was already talk, or soon would be. The talk had her name in it, and her father's. A woman who had sheltered a duke alone for a fortnight was a woman the county would make into a story, whether she willed it or not. She could hide from that in her cold kitchen and let the story be told about her. Or she could go and stand in the great house and hear it to her face. She went. She wore her best gown, which was 3 years old and grey, and she was glad of the grey because it was honest, and she meant to be nothing at Northburn if she could not be honest. Northburn was the largest thing she had ever stood inside. That was her first clear thought, as the blue carriage carried her up a mile of avenue between bare wet limes. That a person could live an entire life in a house like this and never once be alone by accident. Never once be warm all the way through. For no fire made by man could reach the middle of such rooms. They took her cloak. They led her across a hall floored in cold, pale stone, under a ceiling lost in shadow. past portraits of men with pale grey-green eyes, who all looked as though they were deciding what she was worth. And they brought her to a small, warm chamber at the heart of all that stone, hung with faded rose silk. There a very old woman sat bolt upright by a great fire, a stick across her knees. She watched Maria come the whole length of the room. "So," said the Duchess of Eastmere, the girl who did not know. "Your Grace." Maria curtsied, correctly, the way her mother had taught her long ago for occasions that had never come. "You sent for me." "I did. Sit down. There, where I can see you." The old woman studied her with two black eyes that had not dimmed with the rest of her. She was perhaps 80, tiny, straight-backed, magnificently plain, in grey stuff and old lace, and she had a face like a clever hawk. "You're not a beauty." "No, Your Grace." "Don't know Your Grace me as though I'd complimented you. I'm 81, and I've buried a duke, a son, and two better women than either of them. I've no time left for the sort of conversation where people say the opposite of what they mean." The stick tapped the floor once. "You stitched my grandson's head." "I did, and fed him, and did not know him." "I did not." Maria kept her hands still in her lap. "He let me not know him, Your Grace, for a fortnight. I have come, if I am honest, more to say that to someone than for any other reason. He let me open my whole heart to him, believing us equals, and he was this." She looked around the cold, magnificent room. "I don't know the word for what that is. My father would have had one." The old woman's eyes glittered. She was, Maria realized with a shock, pleased. "The word," said the Duchess, "is cowardice, though it dresses very well. Sit still, girl, and I'll tell you a thing about my grandson that he will never tell you himself, because he doesn't know it, and would deny it if he did." She settled the stick. "Roland has been looked at every day of his life, and known by not one living soul except me. I am old, and will die, and he is terrified of it, of being nothing but the title. So once or twice a year he runs off in a plain coat to be no one, and comes home no better, because you cannot cure a lonely man by handing him a fortnight of being lonely somewhere else." She leaned forward. "And then he ran off, and his carriage broke. A girl came out in a flood and pulled him into a warm kitchen. She treated him precisely as though he were a man. Do you understand what you did to him? You did the one thing that has never been done. You did not want anything from him. He does not know how to survive it. He has come home altered and short. He snaps at the servants, and will not say why. And I, who am old and have nothing left to lose, sent for the reason before he could pretend it away." Maria's throat had closed. "Your Grace, whatever I did to a man named Roland, who does not exist. I don't know your grandson, the Duke, at all." "Neither does anyone else," said the old woman crisply. "That is precisely the difficulty, and precisely why I like you." She rang a small bell on the table beside her. "Now, there is an unpleasantness we must speak of, because I promised you the truth, and the truth is unpleasant. You sheltered an unmarried man, alone, in your house for a fortnight, with no one but an old servant by. In the eyes of the world that has already happened, whatever did or did not happen, and the eyes of the world are the only eyes that count in these matters. God rot them. The county will make a tale of you within the month. It has begun already. There is a young woman in this county who will see to it that it does." A young woman. The old Duchess's mouth thinned. Lady Delphine Everley. My late husband, may he be forgiven a great deal, more or less promised Roland to her in the cradle, and she has never for 1 hour since doubted she would be Duchess of Eastmere. She is handsome and clever. She has waited 9 years. And she has just learned that my grandson spent a fortnight snowed up with a doctor's daughter and came home unable to speak her name at dinner. You are at present the most hated woman in 3 parishes, and you have not yet met a soul who hates you. I thought you had better know it from me. The Duke came at dusk, and Maria was ready for him, and was not ready at all. He came into the rose-room without ceremony, still in riding dress, the small pale scar at his brow catching the firelight. He stopped when he saw her. For 1 unguarded second, his whole face opened like a door thrown wide. Then he saw her own face, and closed his, and stood very straight, and was a duke. "Miss Oakeshaw," he said. "Your Grace." She rose and curtsied, low and correct. She saw the word land on him like a blow. She had never once in a fortnight given him a title, and now she gave him the coldest one she owned. "I am glad to see your head has mended. You'll have a scar, as I said. Maria, you'll forgive me, Your Grace, but I don't believe you have the right to my given name in this house. You had it in mine. That was a different man." She kept her voice level and her hands folded, and did not let one of them see how it cost her. "You let me believe we were the same. I told you I had never been seen. I told you that by my own fire, as one plain person to another, and you were the Duke of Eastmere the whole time. You said nothing? And then you said—" her voice caught once, and she mastered it. "You said you saw me. You did. You saw me not knowing. And you kept the not knowing like a comfort, like a warm room you could stand in and leave whenever you chose." He'd gone very white. The Duchess, in her chair, watched the 2 of them like a general watching a field. "That is exactly what I did," he said, low, not defending it. "And I have known since the moment your letter was written that I would have to stand where I am standing now and hear you say it. I told myself it was harmless, a small thing, a holiday from myself." His jaw worked. "It was the least harmless thing I have ever done. It was the only true fortnight of my life, and I built it on a lie. Now I've broken the one place where I was ever simply a man. I'm sorry, Miss Oakeshaw. I have not said that word aloud in some years. I find I mean it more than I've meant anything." She had not expected him to give her the whole of it, unarmored. It made the anger harder to hold, which made her hold it tighter, because she did not yet trust the softer thing beneath it. "Being sorry," she said, "is easy in a warm room. My father used to say so. Good night, Your Grace. Your grandmother has been very kind. I'll go home in the morning, and you may all forget me, which is a thing this world does exceedingly well." "You can't go home," said the Duchess from her chair, in the tone of a woman laying down a trump. "That is the other half of what I brought you here to hear. You'll both sit and listen to it, for I am old, and it is my house, and I have earned the right to be listened to." She rapped the stick. "Sit." They sat, both of them, like scolded children. "Now," said Sibylla, Duchess of Eastmere, "here is the world as it is, not as it ought to be. Lady Delphine Everley will have it about the county within the month that Miss Oakeshaw is my grandson's cast-off, his fortnight's amusement taken up in a flood and thrown down after. She will say it kindly. In that way she has. And it will stick, because there is just enough shape of truth in it to hold the paint. Miss Oakshaw's name will be gone. Her father's name over the door will be a joke in the market at Marden. And my grandson will have done that to the one person who was ever decent to him for nothing. He will have to live with it. He is fool enough that it may be the thing that finishes him. She turned her black eyes on Roland. There is one act on this earth that answers all of it. You know what it is. Grandmother, you will marry her. The fire cracked. Somewhere far off in the great cold house, a clock struck. No, said Maria, standing. I will not be married to mend anyone's manners. I did not stitch a man's head to buy a title with it. I would rather be a byword in Marden and keep my own name than be a duchess bought to stop a scandal I did not make. Good evening. Sit down, girl. You've the pride of 10 and the sense today of half of 1. The old woman's voice cracked like a whip, and astonishingly, Maria sat. I did not say marry him for a title. I said marry him to answer the world, which is a different thing and a plainer one. Listen to me, both of you, and be grown people about it. The two of you have already done the thing the world will punish. You spent a fortnight alone. Marriage is the only sentence the world accepts as served. It restores your name, and it restores his. It costs neither of you a lie. You'll not be pretending to be strangers. You already know each other better than most couples do after a year of drawing rooms. She sat back. Marry to stop the talk. Marry as a bargain, plainly stated, the way sensible people have married since the flood. And then the black eyes went, for one instant, unexpectedly gentle. And then find out at your leisure, in a house full of time, whether the thing you began in that kitchen wants to go on. I make no promises about that part. I only clear you the room to find out. That is all an old woman can do. It is a great deal more than most of them bother with. Maria watched the fire in silence. She was aware of the Duke very still beside her, not pressing her, not speaking, letting the choice be hers, which was the one thing he could have done that reached her. Say it plainly, she said at last, to him, not to the Duchess. Not her, you. Tell me what it is you're asking, in words a doctor's daughter can weigh. No warm rooms, no pretty apologies. The bargain, sir, as it stands. He turned to her fully. The scar caught the light. I am asking you to marry me, he said, to stop a scandal that is my fault, and not yours. That is the bargain, and it is real, and I'll not dress it as anything finer while you're this angry, because you'd never forgive me for it, and you'd be right. You would be Duchess of Eastmere. You would have your own money and your own rooms, and I would never once come to them uninvited. Your name would be safe, and your father's over the door could stay there for pride and not for pity. That is the whole of what I offer that I can promise. He drew a breath. And I'll tell you the rest, though it isn't part of the bargain, and you may throw it back at me. I don't want you for the scandal. I've wanted you since you told me your man could wait 5 minutes. I let you not know me, because I was a coward, who could not bear to lose the one honest thing he'd found. If you marry me to save your name, and never give me another inch of yourself as long as you live, I'll count myself paid. I'll have kept you from being made a byword, for the crime of being kind to me. That is everything I have. Weigh it. She weighed it. She was a doctor's daughter. She knew the difference between a wound that will heal and one that will fester. And she looked a long time at the man before her, who had lied to her and told her the whole truth of the lie, who had just laid himself open on a table and handed her the knife. "I'll marry you," she said, "to answer the world, on my own conditions, which I'll write down, and which you'll sign, because I trust a signature further than a feeling." She lifted her chin. "And the rest, what began in the kitchen, you'll earn, Your Grace, as Roland, not as this." She looked around the cold gold room. "The Duke I've no use for. The man who mended my shutter I have not finished with. Find me that one again, and we'll see." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The almost. "That," said the Duchess of Eastmere, thumping her stick with enormous satisfaction, "is the first sensible arrangement made in this family in 60 years. Ring for the sherry. I'm going to enjoy this enormously." They were married 3 weeks later, quietly, in the small, cold church at Northbourne, with the Duchess and Harker and Mrs. Trevec, and a handful of tenants for witnesses, and the whole county not invited and furious about it. Maria wore grey. She had refused the silks the Duke's people tried to array her in. She had worn instead a good plain gown the colour of a dove's wing, with her mother's small pearl cross at her throat. She had looked, the old Duchess said, more like a duchess than any painted fool in the family gallery. She had signed her conditions, and he had signed them too, gravely in his study before witnesses. Separate rooms, her own income, settled on herself. The doctor's house kept as hers, and never let, and one clause more, which had made his mouth do the almost smile again. He was to call her Maria, never Your Grace, when the two of them were alone, on pain of a shilling to the poor box each time he forgot. He never forgot, and so Maria Oakshire, the doctor's overlooked daughter, became Maria, Duchess of Eastmere. She was mistress now of a house with 100 rooms and 11,000 acres, and she discovered within a week that she was lonelier in it than she had ever been by her own cold hearth. For a great house is a machine for keeping people apart. There were footmen at every door, a maid for every task, a length of polished floor between every chair. And she who had done for herself all her life had suddenly nothing to do, no one to do it near. She had married to answer the world. She had not reckoned on the silence. The great house had 100 clocks, and not one of them agreed, so that the hours came at her in a long, uneven procession all day. She learned the geography of it slowly, as one learns a foreign town. The gallery where the dead dukes hung, the cold state rooms no one entered, the little south parlour where the morning sun came in, which she made her own, because it was the single warm corner in all that grandeur. She was a duchess with nothing to be duchess of, and she filled the empty days the only way she knew, which was to make herself useful to somebody, anybody, before the uselessness swallowed her whole. He came to her, as he had promised, only when asked, which for the first fortnight was not at all. She was too proud and too raw and too uncertain of her own footing in that cold gold place to send for the man who had lied to her, however truly he had confessed it. And he, understanding this better than she gave him credit for, did not press. He left her the room to find her feet, as his grandmother had left them both the room to find each other. But he did other things. He put her father's medical books, which she had brought in a single small trunk, into the finest cases in the library, on a shelf at the height of her own hand, with a good lamp beside the chair. He had the dead doctor's name lettered in gilt on the spine of a blank ledger, and left it on the desk. If she wished to keep an account of the estate's sick, she might. For there were sick, tenants, servants, cottagers, and no surgeon nearer than Marden. He said nothing about any of it. She found them the way she found everything he did, by coming upon the finished thing and knowing whose hands had made it. She began, tentatively, to be of use. It was the only country she knew how to live in. She visited the tenants' cottages with the housekeeper, and where there was a fever, or a child-bed, or a festering hand, she did what her father's daughter did, quietly, well, asking nothing. Robin's mother, from the old life, sent word she was near her time. Maria rode 8 miles in a March wind, and brought the child into the world with her own hands. She rode home again, grey with cold, and more herself than she had felt since her wedding. The county saw. Of course the county saw. A duchess with her sleeves turned up in a cotter's kitchen was precisely the sort of thing the county could not forgive. And Lady Delphine Everley made a great deal of it, in her kind way, over a great many teacups. So very worthy, Lady Delphine was heard to say. One does admire it, though of course it comes naturally to her. She was bred to it, poor creature, before dear Eastmere raised her up. A doctor's girl. One does hope she'll not bring the smell of the sick room into the assembly. But then, she'll not be at the assembly, surely. Duchesses of Eastmere have always led it. This one, I imagine, would rather be lancing boils. It got back to Maria, as such things are always meant to. She heard it out, and thanked the woman who had carried it, and said nothing, and went on setting the estates sick to rights. But it lodged in her, the small barb of it. It named the exact shape of her fear, that she was a useful thing raised up, and would be put down again, that she had no place of her own in the bright world where dukes and their proper ladies danced. The thaw between them, when it came the way the real one had, slowly, without announcement, in the evenings. He found her in the library one night, late, the fire down, the good lamp lit, her father's ledger open on her knee. And instead of retreating, as he had trained himself to do, he stood in the doorway a moment. Then he said, "May I sit? I'll not talk if you'd rather. I've had a day of men who wanted things. I'd like to be in a room with someone who doesn't." She studied him a moment. Then she moved the branch of candles to make room, which was its own answer. He came and sat across the hearth from her. He took up the battered cowper. He had had it brought from the cottage, she saw, and read, low and even, while she wrote up the day's sick in a doctor's small, clean hand. And the great cold room grew, for an hour, no larger than a kitchen by a flood. It became their habit. Neither of them named it. He came to the library when the house was abed. He read, or did not read, and by degrees, over many such nights, he told her the things his grandmother had said he would never tell, the father who had valued him for the succession, and not once for himself. The mother dead too early to be remembered. The betrothal in the cradle to a girl he had never chosen, and had never quite found the courage to refuse. For refusing was a scene, and a Duke of Eastmere did not make scenes. The long grey certainty that he was a position with a man rattling around inside it like a dried pea in a drum. "And then," he said one night, not looking at her, "a girl came out in a flood and shouted at me for turning my head. She did not know my name, and I have not been the same man since. I do not want to be." He turned the book in his hands. "I did you a great wrong, Maria. I know it. I don't ask you to have got over it. I only want you to know that the fortnight in your kitchen was not a holiday I went home from. It was the only place I have ever wanted to stay. I've spent my whole life being seen by everyone and known by no one. You did the reverse. You knew me. I could not bear to hand it back." She had put down her pen some minutes before. The fire ticked. "You could have told me," she said. "But there was no whip in it now. That first night, any night, I'd have been angry, but I'd have known you. You chose the not knowing over the knowing. That's the thing I've had to forgive. Not the title, the choosing. I know it." He looked up. "Have you? Forgiven it?" She was quiet for a long time. "I'm nearly there," she said. "Ask me again when I'm sure. I don't say a thing I'm not sure of. It's the only fortune I ever had, and I've kept it careful." Lady Delphine Everleigh came to Northbourne in April, uninvited, as the Duchess had promised she would. She came in a carriage the equal of the Duke's own, in a pelisse the colour of spring. And she was, Maria saw at once, everything the county said. Handsome, poised, gowned like a fashion plate. She had a low, sweet voice, and a smile that arrived a half-second before it reached her eyes, and left a half-second before it did. She was the sort of beautiful that has never once had to be kind, and has therefore never learned how. She had waited 9 years to be Duchess of Eastmere, and she looked at Maria across the cold, pale hall as one looks at a stain on a thing one had thought to inherit. "Your Grace." She curtsied to Maria, exactly a degree too little, and made the degree count. "How charmingly you've settled. I confess I could not stay away. One hears such things. One had to come and see the fortunate creature for oneself." The eyes travelled over Maria's plain grey gown. "And you're just as they say. How refreshing. We are all so very tired of polish." "Lady Delphine?" Maria curtsied back, exactly correctly, giving her nothing to catch. "You'll take tea? You've come a long way to see me, and I'd not have you go thirsty for it." Something flickered behind the lovely face. She had come for a scene and been handed a teacup, and she did not care for it. She stayed 3 days. They were 3 days of small, sweet, expert cruelty, and over the course of them, Maria came to understand exactly what she was dealing with. For Lady Delphine did not rage or scheme in any way a person could point to. She admired. She admired Maria's courage in wearing grey to dinner when the other ladies wore silk. She admired the quaint medical books in the library, and wondered aloud, laughing, whether the Duke's mother's portrait quite liked hanging over a shelf of them. She told long, fond stories of Roland's boyhood, of the summers she had spent at Northbourne as the future of the house, of 100 small, shared things that drew a bright closed circle, with herself and the Duke inside it, and Maria without. And she did it all so kindly, with such apparent warmth, that to object would have been to seem the very shrew the county already thought her. And she watched the Duke. That was the thing Maria saw that the others did not. Under all the sweetness, Lady Delphine watched Roland with a hunger that had gone past love into something colder, something more frightened. It was the look of a woman who has staked her entire self on a single square, and has just seen the wheel begin to turn against her. The blow, when it came at dinner on the 3rd night, and it was aimed with great care. There were guests. The Duke had been persuaded to a small party, the first at Northbourne in years. The long table blazed with plate and candlelight, and Maria sat at the foot of it in grey, among a dozen ladies in silk, and felt every eye that was not looking at her. She bore it. She had borne worse. She talked with the old clergyman on her right about the parish sick, which was the one subject at that table she knew better than anyone, and she was, in her quiet way, holding her own. Then Lady Delphine, from her place near the Duke, lifted her sweet voice down the length of the table. "Your Grace." "Maria, may I?" "I've been longing to ask you all evening, and I know you'll forgive an old friend of the family for being curious." The whole table stilled to listen, as it was meant to. "Is it true? The story is all over the county, so you'll not mind my saying it plainly, that you and dear Eastmere were quite alone together in your little house for a fortnight, before any of this? No chaperone at all, they say, only some old servant. I do think it the most romantic thing. Though, of course," the smile arrived, and did not reach the eyes. "Of course some people are so unkind, and will call it other things than romantic. I only mention it so you may be armed. One does like to help." The silence at the table was total. It was the silence of a dozen well-bred people who have just been handed exactly the thing they came to be handed, and are pretending to be shocked by it. Maria set down her glass. She was aware of the Duke at the far end, gone very still, his hand tightening on the stem of his own glass, a man about to rise and defend his wife, and thereby make the thing 10 times worse. She caught his eye down the length of the table, and with the smallest movement of her hand, she stopped him. This was hers to answer. She had married to answer the world. It was time she did it herself. "It's quite true," Maria said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady, and it carried the length of the table the way her father's had carried across a sick room, and every fork stopped. "His carriage broke in the flood," she said. "The bridge at Colley Ford had gone in the night. There was a man in a ditch with a cut in his head. There was a servant with his shoulder out of its socket. There was no surgeon within 11 miles of impassable road. And I am the daughter of the man who was surgeon to that dale for 30 years. She looked calmly down the table at Lady Delphine. "So yes, I took 2 hurt strangers into my father's house, in a flood, alone, with one old woman to help me. I set the servant's shoulder and stitched the gentleman's head. I fed them for a fortnight on what I had, which was not much. And I asked them for nothing. If that is a scandal, Lady Delphine, then I am very glad to own it, for it is the same scandal my father committed every week of his working life, and the parish buried him loving him for it." No one moved. "You call it romantic," Maria went on, "and then you offer, so kindly, to arm me against those who'd call it worse. But there's no worse in it, and you know there isn't, and everyone at this table knows it too, however much some of them might relish the other. A man was hurt. I helped him. That's the whole of the story." She turned her steady grey eyes full on the beautiful frightened woman across the candles. "I think what troubles you, Lady Delphine, is not that I was alone with him. I think it is that I did not know who he was, and that he stayed anyway. That is a different thing, and I understand it wounds you, and I am sorrier for it than you will believe. But I'll not be made a byword to soothe it. I've a name of my own. I mean to keep it. For one long moment, Lady Delphine Everley sat perfectly still, and her lovely face did a thing Maria had not expected, and would remember with something close to pity for the rest of her life. It crumpled. Only for an instant, and only at the eyes. But Maria, who had watched 100 people in the moment the worst news reached them, knew exactly what she was seeing. She was seeing a woman look, for the first time in 9 years, at the shape of a life without the one thing she had built the whole of herself around. She was seeing fear. Naked, human, unpretty fear. Then the mask came down again, sweet and smooth. But it was too late. The table had seen it too, and the table's sympathy, that fickle, merciless thing, had turned all at once. It had turned toward the woman in grey, who had answered so squarely, and not toward the beauty who had struck in the dark. "Well," said Lady Delphine, with a small, bright laugh that fooled no one. "How stoutly you defend yourself. I only meant to be kind." "I know you did," said Maria gently, and let her keep that, because it was the only thing the poor woman had left to keep. And Maria had not been raised to strip a defeated creature to the bone. "Will you take more wine? The lamb is very good." The Duke found her afterward on the long, cold gallery, where she had gone to stand at a black window, and let her heart come down out of her throat. She heard him come. She did not turn. "You didn't need me," he said. He stopped a little way off. "I was halfway out of my chair to do it badly, and you stopped me with your hand, and you did it better than any man at that table could have. You did it better than I have ever seen it done." A pause. "You were magnificent, Maria." "I was frightened the whole time." She kept looking at the dark glass, at her own grey reflection floating on it, at the rain that had begun again against it. Soft now, an ordinary rain. "My knees have only just stopped. That's what magnificent is." He came to stand beside her at the window, not touching, the width of a hand between them. "Not the absence of the fright, the going on through it. I've watched brave men in the Lords who hadn't a tenth of it." He was quiet a moment. "She'll leave in the morning. I don't think she'll trouble you again. There's nothing crueler you could have done to her than the kindness you did at the end. And I don't think she has any idea what to do with a woman who wins and then hands back the field. I didn't do it to win." Maria turned at last and looked up at him. The scar sat pale over his brow in the reflected light. "I did it because I saw her face. And I've seen that face before, on people who've just lost everything, and I couldn't strike it one more time. Whatever she is, she's spent 9 years being told she'd be you. And then she wasn't. That's a hard thing. It doesn't excuse her. But I've buried enough people to know that everyone's carrying more than they show, even the ones who show us their worst." He looked down at her, and something in his pale eyes moved and settled, the way a thing settles when it has at last found its place. "There it is," he said quietly. "There what is?" "The thing I could not hand back." He shook his head, slowly, wondering. "You know me, Maria, better than my grandmother, better than I know myself. You've known me since the ditch, and it isn't the title you know, or in spite of, or around. It's just me. There's a man in here, after all. You're the only one who ever came looking for him." The rain whispered on the glass. Down the gallery, far off, the sounds of the dinner going on without them. And Maria, Duchess of Eastmere, had married a stranger to answer the world. She had been finding the man inside him, one honest evening at a time. Now she looked up at that man and knew, with the plain, sure knowledge that was the only fortune she had ever trusted, that she was near enough now, that she was there. "Roland," she said. Just that. His name. The name he had given her by the fire. The plain one. The true one. The only one she had ever wanted. She said it the way he had first said hers. Like a thing set down that had been carried too long, and she watched it reach him, and watched the last of the Duke go out of his face, and watched the man she had pulled out of a ditch look back at her hole. "Maria," he said. "Ask me again," she told him. "The thing you asked me in your grandmother's room. About the rest of it. About what began in the kitchen." Her heart was going hard, but her voice, her father's voice, was steady. "I'm sure now. Ask me." He asked her. Not with the bargain this time, and not in a cold gold room. There on the dark gallery, with the ordinary rain on the glass, in words a doctor's daughter could weigh, and did. And she gave him her answer. She had been an honest woman too long to give it before she was certain of it. She never once, in all the long years after, had cause to take it back. They did not tell the county. They let the county go on, thinking what it liked. By degrees it was a softer thing than it had thought at first. For a duchess who rode 8 miles in the wind to bring a cotter's child into the world was not, in the end, so easy to shame. She had faced down Delphine Everley at her own table without once raising her voice. Stories need a victim to hold their shape. Maria refused, quietly and completely, to be one. And after a while, the story of the doctor's daughter and the Duke turned, in the retelling, into something the county grew rather proud of. As counties will, once they have decided, a thing was inevitable all along. Lady Delphine Everley married within the year a viscount with a great deal of money and a house in town. If she was not happy, she was at least occupied. The last Maria heard of her, she had taken up a charity for foundlings, and was, by all accounts, ferociously good at it. It did not surprise Maria at all. The fear that had crumpled her face at the dinner table was, she had always thought, only love that had never been given anywhere useful to go. She wished her well. She meant it. It cost her nothing, and it was the sort of thing her father would have done. The old Duchess of Eastmere lived to see her great-grandson born. She had announced her firm intention of doing so, and no one had dared contradict her. She held him in the rose-room by the great fire, and pronounced him plain, which in her mouth was the highest praise she owned. "He has her chin," she told her grandson. "Thank God, and not the family's, which has been the ruin of the lot of you, and he'll have her plain good sense, if you don't spoil it out of him." She looked up at Roland from the small, fierce ruin of her face. "You did one clever thing in your life, boy. You broke your carriage at the right ditch. See, you never forget whose hands pulled you out of it." He never did. Years later, many of them, good ones, full ones, there was a night at Northburn when the beck came up in a storm, the way it had that first autumn. The rain came at the windows in long grey sheets. The great house creaked and streamed and held. Maria stood at the window of the room that had once been the cold rose room and was now the warmest in the house. A candle in her hand, she watched the water rise silver in the dark over the low fields, and she thought of a girl going down a flooded lane with a lantern held low. not knowing that the world was about to open its door. She heard him come. She always heard him come. He stood behind her and looked out at the storm over her shoulder. And neither of them said anything for a while, because they had long ago learned that the best of what passed between them passed in the quiet. "Someone's carriage will break tonight," he said at last. "In a ditch, in this. Very likely. I hope whoever it is has the luck I had." He put his arms round her, and she leaned back into him, and the rain ran down the black glass. "I hope there's a light in a window, and a doctor's daughter behind it who isn't afraid of a flood." Maria watched the water climb, and did not answer for a moment. Then she set her hand over his, over the plain gold ring that would have cost him a shilling to the poor box every time he forgot, and which he never forgot. "There's always a light," she said. "That's the whole secret of it. You only have to be the sort of soul who'll go out in the storm to find the person carrying it, and the sort who'll open the door when the stranger knocks. The rest looks after itself. It looked after us. Outside, the flood rose and fell, and rose again, as floods do, as they always have. Inside, in the warm heart of the great cold house, a single candle burned steady in the window against the dark. It was a house that a girl in a grey gown had taught, at last, to hold its breath no longer, and the candle burned the way a light does when someone means it to be seen. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city